In this video, we'll try to understand useState hooks in React. First, let's try to understand what a state means in a React component. In layman's term, a state means how a thing is at a particular point in time. A state in React is quite similar to the emotional state of a person, you can say. For example, let's say a particular person is happy or sad. Now, depending on whether he's happy or sad, he might express his happiness and sadness in a different way. If a person is happy, like if the emotional state of a person is happy, he might express happiness by smiling. Similarly, if the emotional state of a person is sad, he might express his sadness by crying. Similarly, the React component has a state. Now, depending on how his state changes, the React component might render differently. Let's try to understand this thing, defining a state variable inside your React component. Now here I have an app component inside my React application, which I created using create React app. Let's define a state variable inside this thing. Let's define a variable inside the app component using state. For that, you can make use of the useState hook. This is how you define the state variable. Let's render the count variable here. If I save this thing, you can see nothing is rendered. That's because the default value for the count is undefined here. Let's add a default value for count. I added a default value of 0 and that renders on the screen. Now let's add a button on click of which we can update the value, which will update the count. For updating the count, we can add a callback function here called setCount. It can be setCount or it can be update count. Update count. It's better to provide a meaningful name which defines what it does. I'll just keep it setCount for the time being. And we can call the setCount here directly. And on click of this thing, we can call this method here setCount, and we can set the value as 100. Let's say I'll just save this thing. And once I click the update button, you can see the value gets updated to 100. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that you should not be calling the setCount here directly, because if you do, what will happen is when this component renders, the setCount will be called initially, and that might lead you to an error. Like, let's say if I save this thing, you can see too many re-renders. React limits the number of renders to prevent an infinite loop. So for this, we need to call it like this. Or you can do one thing, you can move this thing out of this thing here and maybe provide some other method call here, like handle button click, and define the method here. Handle inside we can call set update count. That also works same. I'll refresh the app, click update. That works fine. So although this thing works fine, this is not the correct way to update the state variable. Let's try to understand this with the help of a scenario. I'll just add a for loop here. Inside the for loop, I'll just update the count variable, like count plus I. So basically, I'm just summing the value of I from 0 to 9. I'll just also log the value of count here. So I'll just refresh the application here and click on the update button. You can see the value or the sum is being shown as 9. And if you check the log, every time the value of count is 0. Now why it's happening? When you click the button here, this method gets executed. Inside we are running a for loop. On each iteration, we are calling the update state method to update the state variable. Now this thing doesn't update the state immediately, it gets queued up, and once this whole execution finishes, it updates on the final render. So at the last moment, when this thing is done execution, the value of count is still 0 and the value of I is 9, which gives you 0 plus 9 gives you 9. Now how do you fix this thing? In order to fix this thing, or in order to access the proper value here, you can do is you can remove this thing. You'll be getting the previous value here, which you can utilize for calculating the current value. You can do it like previous value plus I, and we can return this value. For the sake of clarity, I'll just log the previous value also here. I'll just save this thing, refresh the application, click on update, and that gives you the sum. The log is not proper. Okay, the log needs to be previous here, right? I'll just save it, refresh it once more, click on update. You can see the previous value is logged properly. Similarly, the sum of the numbers is also proper, which is 45, right? So that's the proper way to use or to update your state. And so if your state depends on the previous value, you can update it this way, or if it doesn't, you can update directly also. You don't need to write this whole code for this thing. You can write directly also, like you give it plus I, and we'll refresh the application from here, click on update. That gives you 45. If you find this video useful, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video and share the video, and do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.